Hello everyone. During August we're spending Sundays in Hamworthy Park as long as the weather's okay. Imagine you're there now and you're looking out. What do you see? Well, you can see the Purbeck Hills, you can see the waves, you can see the sand, the islands. We're going to look in the Bible each week and see what these things tell us about God and about ourselves. So last Sunday, 100 of us gathered together and we looked at the hills, and Tim helped us to see from Psalm 121 how the hills are a constant reminder that it's our God who helps us. This week, we're going to think about the wind and waves, and to do that, we're going to look at Psalm 93. Let me read it to you. The Lord reigns. He's robed in majesty. The Lord is robed in majesty and armed with strength. Indeed, the world is established firm and secure. Your throne was established long ago. You are from all eternity. The seas have lifted up, Lord. The seas have lifted up their voice. The seas have lifted up their pounding waves. Mightier than the thunder of the great waters. Mightier than the breakers of the sea. The Lord on high is mighty. Your statutes, Lord, stand firm. Holiness adorns your house for endless days. I wonder whether you've ever asked a question, who's in charge around here? Sometimes we ask it when things seem to be out of control. So you might have asked it out of anger. You've had a terrible meal in a restaurant, or you've been kept up all night in a hotel, or you've bought something that's rubbish, and you ask, who's in charge around here? I think we feel that a bit when we look at the news, don't we? The division and hatred, the unrest and the wars, the riots and the murders. For goodness sake, who's in charge? But we could also ask it from a place of fear. Why is everything going wrong? Does anyone know what they're doing? I'm scared that no one does. Are we on our own in this mess? Who's in charge? Who will help me? Deep down, each of us wants to know someone's in charge. That someone is responsible for the world we live in. That there's someone we can complain to when things go wrong, who we can turn to for answers and for help when things seem to be out of control. Well, the answer Psalm 93 gives is that the Lord is in charge. He reigns, he's the king. And he's not just king over little Israel, he's king over the whole world. In fact, the psalm says there's never been a time when he was not king. He's been the king since all eternity. Human kings may wear all their finery. Well, God's robes are his majesty. His weapon isn't a little sword or spear, but his mighty strength. And as a result of his rule, well, the earth is stable, it's firm and secure. But if we're being honest with ourselves, it doesn't always feel like that, does it? It doesn't always feel like the Lord is reigning. The psalmist puts it like this in verse 3, the seas have lifted up, Lord. The seas have lifted up their voice. The seas have lifted up their pounding waves. But you can picture the scene, can't you? Hopefully on Sunday it's going to be a lovely day. But sometimes in the winter it's not. And the wind whips up the waves, and the waves crash over the prom, and sometimes they even break over the beach huts. Maybe you've been in a storm at sea. And you've stood on the back of a ferry thinking, oh my goodness, are we going to make it to port? Well, verse 3 is more than a storm at sea. The Israelites they weren't really a seafaring nation. They'd looked at the storms from the safety of the land and they thought that ocean is just a world of chaos and evil. And this then is a cosmic storm. The seas are a threat to the Lord reigning. The psalmist repeats the phrase, the seas have lifted up, and he does it again and again. And it almost feels like the swell of the waves. Waves that are terrifying, storms that seem uncontrollable. Which leads us to ask, who will we look to when the storm rages around us? We saw last week, didn't we, that there are all sorts of things that we can look to for help. But in the face of this storm, they can't help us. So can the Lord really overcome the forces of chaos and evil? Can he look after us in our storm as the waves threaten to overwhelm them, to capsize, to drag us beneath the waves? Well, listen to verse 4. Mightier than the thunder of the great waters, mightier than the breakers of the sea, the Lord on high is mighty. Just watching the Olympics reminded me of Usain Bolt. What a runner he was. I mean, in fairness, he probably still is, actually. But do you remember watching him as he went over the line? Often he just put his finger to his lips. What was he saying? Look at my run. Look at my time. And all of you, be quiet. He's silencing his rivals, silencing the critics. And as the wind and waves rise up toward God, he just puts his finger to his lips. Shh, he says. I'm greater than you. I'm mightier than you. Quieten down. So listen, whatever storm you're facing right now, know this, the Lord on high is mightier. He is with everyone who puts their trust in him. We are completely secure in his hands, no matter how terrible the storm may be, no matter how strong the waves are pounding against us. Tim Keller puts this in a lovely way. He says, for everyone who trusts in Jesus, because of God's great power, both in creation and salvation, the world is safe for you. The world is safe for you. It's an astonishing statement, isn't it? And I wonder whether you believe that. Does your life feel like that? The psalmist wasn't stupid. He knew the world doesn't always feel very safe for any of us, especially Christians. Followers of Jesus still get sick, still suffer, they're persecuted, they die. So what does Tim Keller mean when he says the world is safe for us? What does the writer of Psalm 93 mean when he says we can take comfort in the Lord reigning on our behalf? Well, verse 5 tells us that everyone who puts their trust in Jesus has eternal safety. They will be with him in his house for endless days. Death is not the end. It's never the end for the Christian. Jesus has authority to bring us through death into his Father's presence forever, into a glorious new creation with him. That's a precious truth for us, whatever storm we're facing. But this psalm also promises that we'll never be alone now in that storm, because he'll be with us. How do I know? Well, verse 5 tells me that the Lord's statutes, his promises, stand firm. No matter the storm, they cannot change his word of promise to us. You can hold on to God's word through the fiercest storms of your life because he reigns. He is mightier. So why not spend some time this week thinking about who's in charge? Perhaps turn to Psalm 93 every day if you can. Enjoy the good news that the Lord reigns over your life and the world, and that we can depend on him even when the storms are raging. In Jesus, he's for us and with us. And come along on Sunday if you can, because we're going to see how Jesus takes this psalm and uses it to help the disciples to trust him in their storm.